Welcome back. So this is What Causes Near-Death Experiences by the SciShow Psych YouTube channel. I've never seen this. I never see any of the videos that I comment on like this before I actually press the play button, so I'm seeing them the first time that you are, unless you've seen this before. So let's get into this. I believe this is mainly a channel that focuses on the material explanations or the possible material explanations of near-death phenomena. So I'm curious to see what the evidence is that's provided and the way that the near-death experience is portrayed. So let's see.
Hopefully you have never had a near-death experience, but if you have, I'm glad that you survived it. Maybe this sounds familiar. A blinding white light, your life flashing before your eyes, floating out of your body and looking down on that body from above. Honestly, it might sound familiar either way. At this point, the near-death experience is a bit of a cliche in pop culture, but this stuff really happens. Near-death experiences are most likely caused by a bunch of different processes, and scientists are still figuring out all of the mechanisms, but either way, these experiences probably aren't as mystical as they seem. There are accounts of near-death experiences going back to ancient Greece, and because modern medicine can bring people back from the brink of death more often, they are even more common now. What's weird is that most people who have them report seeing the same kind of stuff. The white light, the out-of-body experience, the sense of peace, an awareness of being dead.
As well as all the after effects that come in people's lives, and many other similar factors.
Experiences are so universal that there's actually a standardized questionnaire to evaluate whether or not someone has had a near-death experience. But when it comes to understanding why they happen, things are less clear. For one thing, there's virtually nothing medically, demographically, or psychologically different about the so-called experiencers compared to non-experiencers who have also almost died.
Or experiencers that have not had their experience recorded in memory and therefore seems as if it hasn't taken place. We don't know whether they haven't had an experience or whether they had but don't remember it.
Also just really.
And another important point to that is that a lot of the drugs that are used in these kind of these situations, like I suppose cardiac arrest and other life-threatening occurrences where this kind of experience can take place, a lot of the drugs that are used there are very I always use the wrong word here, amnesic, which means they have properties that are designed to stop you from remembering them. So it could be that these drugs are taking away the ability to remember. It's shown, or it has been shown in studies, that the more drugs that are given, the less likely you are to record or report an experience.
Really hard to study. It's generally frowned upon to almost kill someone while they're in an fMRI machine. Also, studies of near-death experiences have major sampling issues. Studies done after the fact rely on experiencers identifying themselves as participants, which can cause some serious bias. But other studies, like ones where experimenters waited on call for people to go into cardiac arrest, have a hard time getting enough participants for a good sample size. Also, waiting around for people to start dying, not a super fun job. But even though they're hard to study, there are tons of ideas about what could cause these experiences. And they're probably not just caused by one thing. One idea is that rather than experiencers seeing and feeling the same things because they're actually having similar experiences, they see and feel them because they expect to. This kind of thing happens all the time, like in eyewitness testimonies. People are pretty suggestible, so it's reasonable to think that the cliches about near-death experiences might impact what people actually see. And
reasonable idea, but the data is against it. There's been a lot of studies that suggest that that can't be the case because people have seen things that are by no means expected. You know, the atheist who has no belief in any of this sort of thing will have exactly the same experiences. There are also peak and daring experiences where people have seen deceased people that were not expected to have been dead or were not known to be dead at the time. A lot of people do see what they expect to see. That brings up the question of how the mind interferes, or how the mind affects the experience, whether it creates the experience or whether it kind of affects it.
feel during them. Another view is that they are a psychological response to the threat of death. Beginning in the 1930s, psychologists suggested that these experiences were a result of depersonalization, where you feel detached from your identity and what's happening to you. Basically, you know you're dying, but you feel completely detached from it. It's like it's not real. Among other things, that would also explain why near-death experiences cause calmness and peacefulness. More recent research has argued that dissociation, where your consciousness seems independent from your real physical experience, is actually to blame. Daydreaming is a totally normal example of this, but an extreme case is an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, but daydreaming, you're still very much centered within your physical body, although your mind is is not focused on it being here and now. You know, you're aware still of the sensations of the physical, and that you are localized in the physical body.
And there's some evidence to back this one up. All kinds of trauma often result in dissociation, so there are tests to clinically identify it. The tests ask respondents to identify how often they do things like totally zone out while watching TV or have no recollection of an important event.
Well, the phenomenology between zoning out, watching a TV program or a movie, or even experiencing a traumatic event and being kind of dissociated from that event, which is common, the phenomenology is totally different when it's described by people that have done it.
A study from 2000 looked at 134 subjects who had come close to death, 96 of whom had near-death experiences. They found that the experiencers scored much higher on the dissociation test, meaning that they were more prone to mentally check out of situations. It's also possible that near-death experiences could be entirely or partly biological. They found that the experiencers scored or have no recollection of an important event. A study from 2000 looked at 134 subjects who had come close to death, 96 of whom
134 over 96. So 71% had a near-death experience. Is that... Have I got this right? I believe I've got that right. I've done 96 over 134 by 100, which is giving me the 71.6%. So that's quite a high percentage of people to report having near-death experiences. I believe it's around 20% in the studies of cardiac arrest survivors apparently that have near-death experiences, or at least report them.
Had near-death experiences.
That's a good sample.
They found that the experiencers scored much higher on the dissociation test, meaning that they were more prone to mentally check out of situations.
Was that before or after the experience, or was that their description of their experiences during the experience? Because if it was during the experience, then yes, you'd imagine that because they're experiencing it, their experience of dissociation, the way they describe it, would be, from the way we would interpret what they're saying, would score high on a dissociation scale, because how else can you really describe being out of your body other than feeling like you're not in your body? But if these people were kind of, before their experience, they were more likely to zone out during watching a TV program or whatever, then I'd ask them, well, what was the experience of you zoning out, becoming dissociated while you're alive, awake and functional, versus what you experienced in a near-death experience? Was it the same? Was it different? How would you compare them?
It's also possible that near-death experiences could be entirely or partly biological, and there are a number of possible mechanisms that could explain the things experiencers see and feel.
But none of them are sufficient to do so.
For instance, the combination of fear and depriving the optic nerve of oxygen has been known to cause tunnel vision. And when faced with the extreme...
Except the experience of tunnel vision is different to what's experienced in the near-death phenomena, as I've said in the previous videos. Tunnel vision is generally the experience of, as you said, with oxygen deprivation, it can occur where your vision starts to fade from the outside in, creating a pinpoint of sight in one particular area, and all the rest of your vision being completely faded. That's tunnel vision, but the experience of the near-death tunnel is a three-dimensional tunnel. It's the experience of standing at the mouth of a three-dimensional tunnel, not of tunnel vision. It's completely different phenomenologically.
Stress of dying, the brain probably releases all kinds of chemicals to protect itself, which can lead to some of those other weird symptoms. A 2004 study showed that out-of-body experiences can be triggered by stimulating the temporoparietal junction.
No. Okay, this one again. That's common misconception. Again, coming back to the phenomenology of what is experienced during temporoparietal junction stimulation versus what's experienced in an out-of-body experience is totally different. So when, in the studies, when the temporoparietal junction was stimulated by an electrical charge, the person reported having their legs kind of floating or dropping off the table, or being forcefully pushed upwards or something like that. The out-of-body experience in near-death phenomena and other out-of-body phenomena is, again, completely different from that. You just have to ask the people that have had it, and they'll tell you it's... I don't know if there's anybody, if the person that underwent the study for this, or the people, if there was more than one, whether they had experiences with both this and, I suppose, an organic out-of-body experience, and how they would compare it. But from the study subjects, the way they describe these things, and the near-death experiences, the way they describe their out-of-body experiences, the two are completely separate phenomena, completely different experientially.
A part of the brain that plays a role in processing information from your environment and in distinguishing between yourself and others. Experiments with an anesthesia called ketamine have also suggested that under stress, the brain might release neurotransmitters that cause detached, dreamlike states or hallucinations. And other studies have shown that...
And a study by Grayson and Charlotte, I think it was Charlotte Martial, as well as others, have shown that there is a distinct similarity between near-death experience phenomena and ketamine related phenomena, or at least that ketamine is the closest bears the closest resemblance to an out-of-body or to a near-death experience. Again, in and of itself, ketamine wouldn't be responsible for the whole thing because the phenomenology is different. But I suppose if you take that into account with other psychedelic substances as one experience, you could argue that could account for the near-death experience, at least the subjective aspects of it. Although, again, all of these drugs have distinct differences in their experiences versus a near-death experience. And I believe it's never actually been shown that some of these drugs are produced naturally by the physical brain at death. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe so, if I can remember my talks with Pascal correctly.
Stimulating a part of the midbrain called the locus ceruleus can release noradrenaline, which is involved in fear and stress reactions and can alter your emotions and memories. Both of those processes
are correlated with emotion and memory changes.
Could be related to peaceful emotions, hallucinations, and that sense of your life flashing before your eyes. So it's possible.
But the experience of the life flashing before their eyes, although that does occur in near-death experiences, the more common one that I've heard is the life review, which is a lot more than having memories of one's life passing across your eyes, because it's a panoramic, invasive, but a point of view experience where you are pushed back into the experience as if you're reliving it, and you see the effects of your choice in that particular time, not only from your point of view, but also from the point of view of the others who were involved with that experience. So again, although, life flashing before your eyes does occur, it's more the life reviews that offer the more life-altering kind of experience.
That near-death experiences are caused by a combination of all of these.
Possible. At least, again, the subjective part of it, but I'd add another possible cause to that the nature of consciousness as of yet undiscovered, which may allow for it to continue in a way unknown outside of the physical brain, as the evidence would suggest. And looking at the length of time the video has left, he's unfortunately not going to delve into the most evidential part of near-death experiences, which is the veridical perception. I mean, all of these are perfectly reasonable, generally put together. It would, of course, be number 4, because all 3 of the previous ones, as their own cause, have been shown not to be sufficient by the various studies done by the University of Virginia, as well as other independent research. But certainly you could say that a combination of all of the above could account for the subjective aspects of near-death experiences, and I'd be completely fine with that. However, it's the veridical perception aspects and the third-party verified veridical aspects that render all of this obsolete, I suppose.
Factors, biological and otherwise.
Although not obsolete, just incomplete, I suppose, because with third-party veridical perception, we do have an objective aspect that can be studied and can be verified to be of the real world, I suppose, as opposed to hallucination or illusion.
Of course, there are critics of these studies, and they make a good case. They argue that if these are normal biological mechanisms associated with the stress and trauma of death, why doesn't everyone who almost dies have them? We don't.
Do they? Or, you know, again, it comes back to the question of, does everybody have them, but most can't remember them because of the effect of analgesic? That's the word I always use. It's not analgesic, it's amnesic drugs. Or is it the case that some just don't have them? We don't know. We can't tell. How would you tell?
Don't know, but for people who do have them, there are a whole bunch of scientific explanations for where they might come from. And whether
from the subjective point of view, from the subjective aspects of them, perhaps, but again, none of these scientific, I mean, you say scientific explanations, it's really material scientific explanations, because science is the human process of discovery. There are phenomena that lie outside of our current predominant theory of materialism, which, I mean, materialism isn't science; it's a philosophy based on scientific observations. But there are now observations which don't work to that philosophy. So, in my opinion, you know, just because something doesn't fit to a certain philosophy, in this case materialism, doesn't mean that it's not a scientific thing. It's just science beyond what we currently believe to be the predominant idea of life, I suppose, if that makes sense.
they're caused by biology, psychology, or something in between, near-death experiences can teach us a lot about how our brains work and that weird thing that we call consciousness.
But all we can really do with any kind of brain science, any kind of neuroscience, is show the neural correlates of consciousness. We can't show how the brain, if it does generate consciousness, we can't show how, because we that's the hard problem. We don't know, we have no basis of understanding or even showing how non-physical matter, i.e. the brain, although as complex as it is, can give rise to conscious awareness, self-awareness. And all it can do is show us, well, during these experiences, this part of the brain is doing this. That's correlate. That's not causation. So again, it seems to be assumed that it must be created by the brain. These things must be created by the brain. And here's the list of possible explanations that would account for that assumption to be true. And anything that would render consciousness to be a separate thing from the brain, or at least not a causally linked thing, must be pseudoscientific or not a scientific explanation. I'd say yes, it is a scientific explanation, but it's a scientific explanation that adheres to a different philosophy other than materialism.
Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow Psych, brought to you by our patrons on Patreon. If you would like to help support the show and help us keep making episodes like this one, you can go to patreon.com/SciShow. We very much appreciate everybody who does that.
So a good overview of kind of the philosophical position of materialism on the near-death phenomena, at least the subjective aspects of the near-death phenomena. The only thing I'd say is it is incredibly disappointing that they never got into the actual evidential aspect of near-death experiences, which is the veridical perception, because that is I've always said near-death experiences that only include the tunnel, the vision of light, the meeting deceased people, and things like that on their own, I can more than say is a culmination of the 3 points that were listed there. However, it's the veridical aspect of them and the fact that people see things and report things that are verified that they should not physically have been able to see, even if they were alive and healthy. When they see things in other rooms or in other locations far removed from their physical body, and when they see things during a state when the brain was monitored to be flat, which should be medically impossible if materialism is correct and all the observations we've made through that philosophy are consistent. And it's that kind of phenomena that renders the near-death experiences as reasonable evidence to suggest that mind and brain may be separate, or at least may be of a nature that is not what we currently believe it to be. So I'm extremely disappointed that they missed out that very, very, very important aspect of the near-death phenomena. And to me, the fact that they did completely misses the point and would render this video at best very incomplete. But the evidence there wasn't properly represented for what exists currently, although this was October 2017 this video was made. even so, there was more than enough data there at that time that should have been added but wasn't. So any other videos, any other articles? We seem to be focusing a lot on near-death experiences, which people always come to me with, but I'm not really interested specifically in near-death experiences. I'm interested in any phenomena that ask the question of what happens after physical death and what is the mind in relation to the brain. So any other articles or videos on any other subject that encompasses that question, send them through to me to have a look, and I'll give you my thoughts. Thanks very much, and I'll see you all next time.